I guide your gaze along a soft line in the dark, just a hush of light laid across the starfield, a pale whisper that keeps its own slow rhythm. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't ask for applause. It draws a quiet boundary where vacuum meets dust, where a thin coma brightens the background by a fraction, and then lets the night lean back in. I follow that edge with you. From the brightward side, where sunlight gathers, across the dimmer arc where particles thin, and into the faint tail where light loosens into grain. The halo is small, but it has presence. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that lingers, like a pencil line softly smudged. When I defocus the image by a breath, the smear resolves into a more even glow. When I recenter, I can still see a dense core, not sharp, just slightly brighter, as if the light there is holding itself together a little more firmly than the rest. Across the field, stars hold steady, their points fixed by long habit. Against them, the visitor has a different cadence. It shifts between frames, a barely perceptible step to the left, then a touch down, each move a simple confession that it belongs to another path. I trace that path with the felt tip of my attention, a gentle curve, shallow but decisive, a promise that this motion will not loop back. The line says, outward, then away. The line says this is a passage, not a return. There is a colour in the light, a suggestion more than a swatch. It lives close to green, the kind that oxygen sometimes lends to comets. But here, the tint seems to wink in and out, caught between gas and distance, between signal and patience. I don't name it. I let it ebb. Naming is for daytime. Tonight, noticing is enough. On the sunward side, the brightness ever so slightly thickens, like a brushstroke laid more than once. Activity lives there, the business of ice and heat, of grains carried on gas. But I keep the description simple, so the mind can rest. Light is a letter, written by whatever the surface is doing. It writes slowly, round hand, one loop of brightness for each rotation, one softened flourish for each flare of gas that rises and then settles again. The halo keeps a slow pulse, nothing intense, just a breathing of illumination. I step the focus outward and show you the neighborhood. The star field is dense, because the sky in this direction is generous with lights. The visitor crosses that crowded page like a quiet line in a busy ledger. Every time the camera reads again, the ledger moves the line forward one notch. You don't need equations to feel it. You can feel it in the patience of the sequence. This is what travel looks like when the unit is millions of miles and the metronome is a shutter. This is what a story looks like when it's told in light alone. We talk softly about direction because direction is the heart of its calm. Most comets we learned on were homegrown. Their lights followed the solar handwriting we recognize. This one writes at a different angle, a counterstroke against the script, almost in the plane where the planets think, yet not of them. I trace that angle with a fingertip on the screen and let the line tell you more than I do. The light is the only honest narrator out here. We are interpreters, latecomers, reading shine and shadow, trying not to overspeak. If a wind could exist here, you might imagine the halo as a candle flame, but even that is too busy an image. The truth is gentler. What you see is the sum of small departures, molecules leaving a surface, dust lifted and left behind, photons touching and reflecting. Light is the mediator. It meets each particle and carries the news to your eyes. There is material here, it is faint, and it is enough. The The tail is less a tail than a thinning. It isn't a banner so much as a decrease, a direction that colour and brightness agree upon. When I mark that direction for you, you can feel the geometry without numbers. Sun to nucleus, nucleus to wake, shine to shadow, then shadow to not quite shadow. The whole scene is logic written in grayscale, and the quiet of it is its mercy. You came to rest. It knows. I close in again, this time not on the nucleus, but on the gradient where coma gives way to background. There, at that boundary, the light speaks softly about composition. Certain wavelengths lift more than others. Certain gases answer more eagerly to sunlight. The result is a faint imbalance our eyes translate as mood, and instruments later translate as chemistry. We let the mood come first. It's late. Your breathing has found its long wave. You're allowed to learn like this, slowly, gently, in the language of glow. As the sequence advances, a pattern develops that is no pattern at all, just steadiness. No big outbursts, no violent flares, only a measured increase as the sun's hand grows warmer, and then, for a moment, is hidden by geometry. If we could keep watching from every vantage, we would, but there are days when the line of sight lays low behind glare, and those days teach a different skill: trust. The light we cannot see still exists. The path continues, even when the page is too bright to read. Now I widen the field one last time and ask you to see what the camera has been steadying toward. A transit that began in far cold, that glides through the inner brightness, and that will ease back toward the dark again. It is not dramatic. It is not a headline here. It is a line. A soft, courteous line across the sky, drawing no more attention than it must, letting the night keep most of its quiet. And in that quiet, another subtle truth arrives on tiptoe. The most astonishing things often introduce themselves as small differences in light, as if the universe prefers to whisper before it speaks. There is a longer sentence inside me I've been saving, and I offer it now, because sometimes a single breath that refuses to break can help the mind fall into step. As the halo leans into the sunward side, and the tail consents to thin, as the stars hold steady on their pins, and the visitor keeps its patient glide, I find that my own attention settles into the same cadence, unhurried, low, tuned to the way light writes its letters, more grateful for the clarity of a thin line than for any grand gesture, and content to let this calm trace be enough for tonight. The colour shifts at the very edge, from a suggestion of green toward a blue, so pale it could be sleep itself. And as that faint dissolve completes, I let the image soften. The room speaks in small sounds, and I let the instruments set the pace. The tracking mount hums at a single pitch. The shutter gives a polite clap and goes shy again. The CCD exhales through a fan that never quite sleeps. A red LED blinks a patient rhythm in the corner, and the whole place becomes a metronome that happens to make pictures of a comet. Hubble's cadence is different. It doesn't live here, but its voice reaches us all the same. A report arrives with a time, a distance, a shape. July 21, a few 100 million miles, a teardrop of dust around an icy core. I picture that exposure as another sound layered into tonight's quiet, long integration as a sustained note, the pointing as a soft glide, the final file drop as a subtle chime that says, yes, the visitor is real and resolved. Across the spectrum, the tone changes. James Webb appreciates faint signatures that our eyes can't hear. Its spectrograph doesn't make a picture first, it makes a scale. Lines stand out, like pure sine tones. one for carbon dioxide, one for water, another for carbon monoxide. And when their volumes are compared, a pattern emerges that is part surprise and part lesson. The room listens to those lines the way a tuner listens for beats between notes. Where the beats slow, a ratio settles. Where the beats vanish, certainty arrives. A different instrument, Spherex, sweeps rather than stares. Its voice is a soft brush across frequencies, a gentle whoosh and settle, building a map of gases that extends beyond a single snapshot. Multispectral passes from August read as overlapping bars on a quiet score. Taken together, they tell us that carbon dioxide isn't only present, it's abundant and stretched far from the nucleus, like a faint chorus that persists, even when the lead falls silent. Closer to the sun, a coronagraph aboard GOES 19 trims away glare and reveals the comet's thread as if it were the hush between louder measures. We don't hear the cut, we hear what's left. A dim point walking the field near perihelion, brightness shifting in a way our minds understand as activity, but our instruments understand as counts per second. A hobbyist's careful processing turns that hush into a discernible tone, and again the room nods to a new line on the staff. All of this is sound to me tonight. Numbers are volumes, pixels are overtones. The guiding error that creeps in when wind finds the dome is a wobble in the low end, and when it settles, the image sharpens as if the bass tightened. If I explain the details softly, sleep can keep its grip. So I let each device announce its part, then step back. A spectrograph here on Earth contributes a thinner voice. It's not Webb, but it has a gift for repetition. Night after night, the same slit, the same calibration lamp, the same standard star, the same careful subtraction of sky. When a line persists across this litany, confidence grows. The water feature swells, then eases. The carbon dioxide line grows more insistently, almost like a tone that continues even after the volume dips, carried by the room rather than the source. I turn to the photometer, which prefers tempo to timbre. It counts photons in neat bins and cares more about whether the beat speeds up or slows down. It notes the modest brightening weeks ago and the steadier plateau as viewing geometry complicated the scene. It doesn't speculate, it stamps times. I'm grateful for its temperament. In a noisy century, a clean clock is a kindness. Telemetry from Mars-bound instruments has its own click. When the object passed that neighborhood, a few eyes nearby blinked in our direction. Not a chorus, more like 2 or 3 taps on wood to say we saw it. It went by, nothing dramatic. We're fine. The taps go on the log, their spacing reminding us that space can be eventful without being alarming. If you listen long enough, you can hear how each device prefers to be believed. Hubble wants you to look. Webb wants you to compare. The coronagraph wants you to subtract. The ground arrays want you to repeat. Each insists on a slightly different kind of patience, which is its own lullaby. The mind slows to the rate of the most careful machine in the room, and the body follows with a softer breath. I talk quietly about ratios, because ratios are how instruments whisper truth. When the carbon dioxide line towers above water, we don't shout, we tune. We check flat fields, dark frames, arc lamps. We nudge the wavelength solution and see if the peak holds. It holds. We ask if scattered light within the instrument could balloon the line. It can't. Not by that factor. The loudest part of the spectrum remains the same, So we let the result join the other notes and call the chord unusual but stable. Data reduction is a kind of mixing. Bias goes first. Thermal noise gets attenuated. Cosmic ray hits are spotted and removed, like pops on an old record. What remains is the signal, which is rarely a solo. Gas sings. Dust hums. Sunlight picks up a grain and strums it. The combined timbre is what we call the coma, and it changes as distance changes, but changes do not equal danger. They equal instruction. Slow instruction. The sort that asks for a second listen, then a third. I have a long breath stored up, and I use it now because a single unbroken sentence can sometimes carry you through the middle of a thought and out, into the quiet beyond it, the way a sustained note can make a room remember its shape. As Webb's lines stand high for carbon dioxide and lower for water, as Hubble's image fixes the outline of dust around an active heart, as Spherex traces the extended gas farther than an ordinary glance would guess, and as a coronagraph finds the comet's small voice next to the sun's loudest light, the story that gathers is not one of alarm, but of character. The kind that emerges when many careful devices hum the same note from different corners until even a skeptic can hear it without strain. You might ask if there's anything here that hints at intent, but instruments are not built to infer intent. They are built to distinguish signal from noise, and on that task tonight, they agree with a confidence that doesn't need to raise its tone. This is ice and dust behaving with a chemistry that leans in one direction more than we expected. That is enough to be interesting. It is not required to be more to be worthy of attention. Before we dim the screens again, I let the room's noises fall back into the floor. The fan softens. The mount returns to its quiet. The last exposure pares down to a soft ping as it saves. What wakes an object this far from the sun? A small question, quiet as a fingertip on a map. The soft answer is that a little warmth will do, less than you'd guess, if the right ices are listening. Carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide stir earlier than water. They lift first, like a tide that rises under a faint moon, and the grains on the surface follow their pull in patient swells. I think of the nucleus as a coast that never sees the same tide twice. Pores open. Frost softens. Gas flows through narrow channels and pulls dust into the open. From far away, the process is only a mild brightening, a slight deepening of the coma's sheen. But it is enough to tell us that the shoreline is awake in places we once assumed would sleep. The numbers that reached us from deep infrared showed it plainly. Carbon dioxide louder than water, a ratio that surprised careful people who don't spook easily. The surprise didn't shout. It raised an eyebrow and held it there. Does that mean water is silent at 3 astronomical units? Not quite. The sea of ice is patchy. Here and there, sunlight finds a seam, and the warmer vapor of H2O joins the flow. Some of it may come from tiny grains lofted and warmed mid-voyage. Some may rise from shallow layers, where thermal waves nudge crystals loose. On nights like this, I favor simple words, because they keep the body calm. Slow warming, early gases, dust carried along. It's a coastal current, not a storm. The path of the visitor has felt like open water since we first traced it. Hyperbolic, retrograde, nearly in the plane where the planets navigate. It sails a course that will pass the sun once and keep going. The wake it throws, its faint tail, leans away from the light, not because it chooses to, but because solar wind draws it that way, as steady as a trade wind and just as impersonal. When I align the frames, the movement is small but steady, like a vessel that knows its heading and neither hurries nor stalls. Why this much activity this far out? I ask again, softer this time, as if the tide might answer differently if given patience. The reply is the same, and it's kinder than we expected. Hypervolatiles do the early lifting. Geometry hides what our eyes would otherwise see. Compositional quirks matter. Not all coasts are carved from the same rock. Some release more easily. Some hold. A map of the coma's chemistry is like a chart of currents drawn in pale ink. The strongest stream tonight is carbon dioxide. It outlines an extended region around the nucleus, broader than a casual glance would predict. Water is there too, lighter script beneath the bold line, its handwriting more tentative because the warmth is marginal. I keep the language gentle because your breath has lengthened. The point isn't to overfill the sails. It's to feel the broad movement and trust the details to instruments that do not tire. It helps to remember the sun's distance as something more than a number. At 3 astronomical units, the light is comfortable rather than hot. It arrives like afternoon in a long season, enough to stir what wants to be stirred, not enough to scorch. On some surfaces, ice has been shadowed for a very long time. On those, a small change makes a large difference, as though a sheltered cove suddenly finds itself open to a new swell. You see the effect as a slow brightening on the sunward side, a brushstroke laid just a little heavier. You feel it as steadiness, not drama. There was a time when we expected water to speak only closer in, when comets were assumed to follow tidy rules about distance and boiling. That was a simpler chart. The newer one is more alive. We've watched enough visitors to know that the ocean of behavior is broader than our first courses marked. Some carry trapped gases that diffuse early. Some present fresh faces to sunlight after a split. And those faces welcome heat like travelers grateful for a warm room. This object's chemistry leans carbonward. That is not a verdict on its nature, only a description of its weather. The shape of the coma carries clues about the engine beneath. If jets are many and distributed, thrusts cancel like waves from several directions, meeting and diminishing each other. The net push is small, the course holds, and the navigator's notes stay tidy. If jets are fewer or favour one quadrant, the vessel might yaw a little, and our ephemerides will need nursing. So far, the log reads calm. There are adjustments, yes, but none that pull the heading into worry. The deck stays level. I set one long sentence out, like a slow crossing, unbroken, because sometimes it's the easiest way to carry everything that matters without waking the mind into busy argument. Carbon dioxide begins the lifting at a distance where water would usually wait. As the coma's reach tells us, the gas flows have found their channels, and the dust is happy to ride, as the tail writes a steady wake away from the sun, and the small corrections to the plotted course remain small. The question of why now relaxes into because this coast is built for early tides, which is to say because composition and porosity and sun angle together have opened passages that will, for a few months, make the object seem more talkative than its neighbours at the same latitude. I turn the chart and check another margin. There's a sectored brightness a few nights in a row, the kind that could be rotation showing us alternating faces. If that's the case, the periodic swelling is only a tide on a turn of the helm, not a storm front. We'll learn the period by stacking nights and letting the pulse speak for itself. For now, your part is easier. Let the idea settle. Waking early is not misbehavior. It's a way some coasts meet the same sea. The old fear that rides with any unusual activity, that maybe this is a sign of something out of the ordinary in a way that threatens, finds no purchase when the numbers are allowed to breathe. The mass required to resist noticeable drift under such outgassing would be large, but symmetry can do the same work more peacefully. Paired vents cancel, a slow tumble spreads thrust over a full circle. The net is a gentle glide. That's not a hand-waving story we tell to soothe ourselves. It's the same seamanship we apply to comets closer in, just extended to a quieter reach of ocean. Before we close our notebook, I paint a small weather note for the mind's edge to carry into rest. Imagine faint vapor streaming from inlets along a cold coast. Not a gale and not glassy calm. Just a patient movement outward that leaves a thin wake behind a traveller bound for farther water. The compass stays on course. The crew keeps low voices. The horizon accepts the vessel without remark. The air in your room does the same. If the early tide keeps this pace, where will it ease next? October 29th, 2025, 11:32 UTC. A small clock glows in the corner of the screen, and a tidy curve of motion reaches its turning point near the sun. The comet doesn't lean into the corner like a driver. It simply keeps the promise of its path, rounding perihelion with the unhurried certainty of something that has been travelling a very long time. I write the moment on a mental postcard, the way travellers once wrote a city and a date, just to say we were here when the road bent. This card has earlier stamps. October 3rd, noted quietly, when the traveller passed the neighbourhood of Mars at a respectful distance. Another note for late October, when glare complicated our view. A penciled arrow toward the first week of November as the geometry improves again. A journey is easier to hold when it keeps a few waypoints, and this one has. Behaved with the courtesy of a good itinerary, letting us check in without rushing. Between waypoints, the pace of motion is a gentle teacher. In each stacked frame, the visitor shifts by a small, honest amount. A reminder that millions of miles can be crossed in the time it takes to brew tea if the days are allowed to add themselves up. I drop a soft line on the chart. Inbound from a cooler reach, curve near the sun, outbound into a broader quiet. The path is hyperbolic. That is the geometry of not returning. And its inclination is small enough to feel familiar, even as its direction is not. The room shares the moment with instruments far away. A coronagraph shows a solitary point practicing its patient step near the sun's bright edge. Ground-based eyes wait their turn and take up the thread as glare thins. A few images from Hubble and Webb find their places like careful stamps on the same card, each with a date, each with a small caption that says what was seen and what could be inferred. No one device tells the whole story. The journey reads best when all the stamps are kept. Perihelion is not a crossing of a finish line. It is one curve on a long map. Activity rises before it and recedes slowly after, changing the coma with a pace that suits sleep. You can think of the nucleus as a traveller who adjusts layers rather than one who sprints. A little more brightness on the sunward side, then a pause, then a little less. A tale that declares direction more than drama. a heading that does not ask us to worry over deviations larger than the night can absorb. I keep to the itinerary motif because it keeps the mind orderly. Waypoint 1, discovery in July, and the first recognition that this motion is not bound to the sun. Waypoint 2, weeks later, the early chemistry that told us which ices were taking the lead. Waypoint 3, the Mars bookmark. Not because of risk, but because a close neighbour's sky watched the same traveller pass. Waypoint 4, today's soft turn around the sun. Waypoint 5, an outbound leg that will grow slowly dimmer and farther, giving our attention time to let go. If you prefer a different kind of card, imagine the same dates written on a single line of travel. There is room for notes that are not numbers. Faint green at the edge, steady tail, no abrupt changes. These are the lines that settle the body when the body wants to settle. We are not racing the comet, we are pacing it. There is a comfort in naming what a timestamp means. When the clock in the corner reads 11:32 UTC, the distance to the sun is about 1 1/3 astronomical units, more light than deep space, less heat than Mercury's court. And the direction of the tail remembers the solar wind as faithfully as a compass remembers north. The object's speed is high in absolute terms, and yet, as a piece of the night sky, it moves with a modesty that keeps the stars calm around it. None of this asks anything urgent from us. The postcard never says "wish you were here" in a way that asks you to hurry. It says we passed this place and it was exactly itself. The habit of waypoints also helps when visibility thins. During conjunction, when the sun's brightness writes over our page, we accept what other instruments can still see and fold their notes into ours. When visibility returns, we compare. The curve keeps curving, the light keeps its quiet. We add another stamp. I write one long sentence now, unbroken on purpose, because sometimes a single strand of thought that does not pause can carry you from the middle of a moment to the edge of rest. As the clock ticks through the late morning UT and the path bends at perihelion, as the Mars waypoint fades into the logbook behind us, and the outbound leg gathers without flourish, as ground and space instruments trade the view like considerate travellers sharing a window seat, the meaning of the date is only this: that a journey with no plan to return has kept its next promise, and will keep the one after that at the same unshowy pace. On a quiet screen, I write 2 more small notations for later reading. One near early November, when the line of sight should be friendlier, and the coma's shape will tell us how the engine beneath is settling after the turn. Another near March next year, to remind us that even long journeys carry companion dates when geometry brings us a little closer again. They are not alarms, they are simply parts of a path. The tail's angle does something pleasant for the mind. It points away from the sun with the confidence of a signpost, and, by doing so, absolves us from guessing. There is no puzzle in its direction that must be solved tonight. The force that shapes it is steady and known. The rate at which brightness eases will be taught by distance and by the traveller's own stores of ice. We can learn those lessons at the tempo of sleep. For listeners who like to hold a picture while drifting, here is one more. The itinerary as a ribbon unspooled across a dark table, small pins marking the dates we've named, the ribbon curving once near the brightest pin, and then heading for the quiet edge of the map. The pins do not press, they only remind. With every hour the ribbon lengthens by a measure too small for worry, large enough to honour. I take one last glance at the clock and at the curve, and I sign the postcard with a note we will recognize later. Kept to course. No hurry. See you on the outbound. Then I set the card aside and let the scene return to its soft hum of normal motion, the kind that makes a room remember how to breathe when a window is opened just a little. At 02:14, the room remembers how to breathe. Listen with me a moment. The room has a floor-softer hush, the kind you notice only when you stop trying to notice. Fans whisper in their lanes. The mount hums a thin note that doesn't change. Somewhere in the building, a duct settles, and then forgets to speak again. Outside, the air is windless, and that absence becomes a kind of sound of its own. I think of the comet's atmosphere, the coma, as a quiet ensemble. Carbon dioxide carries the low register, a rounded tone that stays present even when other voices thin. Water takes the middle, not absent, just softer at this distance, like a melody meant to be implied more than played. Dust is the breath between notes. None of it is loud. It doesn't need to be. Spectra look like music when you've been awake long enough. Lines rise where molecules answer sunlight with their preferred pitches. Infrared brings the bass forward. Visible light sketches faint harmonics. We sweep through wavelengths the way a hand moves across a keyboard, and where a key rings true, chemistry reveals itself. On those nights in August, when the deep instrument in space reported a strong carbon dioxide response against a gentler water part, I heard it first as balance rather than surprise, a chord voiced differently by an interstellar traveller that learned its arrangement elsewhere. Closer to the sun, you might expect a crescendo. At this reach, the score calls for restraint. Gas flows, yes, but in the tempo of late evening rather than noon. A jet will open, lift grains, fade, then another will answer from a neighbouring facet, and over an hour the coma subtly changes its volume without changing its theme. In stacked exposures, that theme shows as a slight thickening sunward and a trailing hush downwind, a call and response so patient that you could miss it if you tried to listen too hard. Noise has its own personality. Thermal noise is a velvet hiss. Readout noise is a tidy tick that vanishes once the file is whole. Cosmic ray strikes are the little clicks you edit out before the track can settle. We do this housekeeping gently, not to erase reality, but to reveal the realer part beneath. When the mix is clean, the comet's tones sit where they want to sit, and we avoid the temptation to push the faders beyond what the sky actually gave. There is comfort in the way different instruments rhyme. The mapping telescope's pass lays down a broad pad of carbon dioxide, extended far from the nucleus, as if someone held a single note long enough to fill the room without ever getting loud. The slit spectrograph sketches narrow lines, precise and reassuring, like plucked strings in an otherwise sustained piece. Imaging puts a soft symbol under everything, brightness where particles reflect sunlight in a million tiny flashes that add up to glow. Out where the solar wind drifts past like a river of charged particles, if we could hear it, it would be a high, steady hiss. The coma hears that hiss as pressure. It feels the sun's light as tempo. Photons arrive at the same beat every second, and molecules respond according to their parts. Carbon dioxide is an early riser. Water waits for a tighter cadence of heat. Neither is wrong. They simply keep time to different cues. I like to count silently while the exposure runs. It's a way to stay in step without rushing. 10 counts, check the guide star. 20, Look at the seeing. 30. Breathe. When the shutter closes, the room seems to listen back, the way a hall leans inward during the last resonance after a chord. The file writes, the graph appears. A small peak nudges a little higher than yesterday. Another stays faithful. Nothing clangs. The quiet is honest. When people ask for meaning, I try to give them tone before plot. The tone tonight is steadiness with a warm, low end. It suggests gas reservoirs that answer sunlight readily, channels that carry flow without complaint, dust that is fine enough to brighten the halo, but not so thick as to turn the scene opaque. Plot, if you want it, is simply that a visitor from elsewhere is speaking a dialect of chemistry that puts emphasis where we in this neighborhood usually do not. The form of the sentence is familiar. The accent is new. If I step closer to the physics, I do it without raising my voice. Sunlight strikes the surface. Energy is absorbed. Ices near the threshold for release. Carbon dioxide, sometimes carbon monoxide, sublimate. Gas escapes through pores and cracks, entraining dust. The outward stream carries momentum. The nucleus feels a small push. If jets are many and distributed, the pushes cancel, and the path stays true within our comfortable tolerances. All of this can be said in a whisper, and remain true. Rotation adds a gentle modulation, like a slow tremolo. If the nucleus presents alternating regions to the sun, activity rises and falls with a period you can measure by ear if you were a clock. We are not clocks, but our instruments are, and they can learn that period by counting photons instead of seconds. A swell every few hours in the light curve does not mean anything dramatic. It means the object turns, and the song repeats. There is a long sentence waiting, and I let it carry itself so your breathing can follow one smooth line without tripping on commas. Because sometimes a single sustained thought is the most restful way to travel through details you care about. As the low voice of carbon dioxide keeps the foundation under the halo, and the gentler middle of water joins, where seams are sunlit, or grains are warmed in flight. As dust adds shimmer without taking over the mix, and the solar wind keeps its thin, unbroken hiss. The entire arrangement holds to a volume that lets the mind unknit, while still learning something quietly true about how an interstellar surface gives itself to light. Every so often, I turn the speakers down even further, metaphorically, and imagine listening from near the nucleus. Gas whispers out through networks of pores, grains tick against each other. Larger clumps settle and then roll when the next gust of molecules pushes past. None of that is literally audible, of course, but the idea of it keeps me from expecting drama, where the physics prefers patience. The universe does not owe us crescendos. Much of it is chamber music. I keep an ear for silence within the silence. If a flare were to come, a sudden brightening, a short solo louder than the rest, we would hear it in the counts, and we would say so. Tonight, the piece avoids that move. It maintains an evenness that speaks well of its balance, and the charts agree. The ratio we measured earlier holds within its uncertainties. The halo's brightness behaves. The tail remembers its direction. If your eyes are heavy now, let them be. You can listen without listening. Let the room reduce itself to 3 threads: the softest fan, the mount's unwavering note, and the breath that has already matched their pace. Keep them in the corner of attention, and let everything else slide into the low, steady floor that carries sleep. For about a minute, we won't add anything. Picture a wide, dark stage with no audience, a few small lamps at the edge, and the comet's tone, low, constant, safe, sustaining under the lightest of harmonics. The air holds the note. Numbers keep time. Screens dim one step, then another. A chair creaks in the control room and then decides against another sound. Far away, sunlight plays its single rhythm on ice, and the response is gentle enough to be a lullaby you don't need to finish to feel. Close in, the dust is a single fleck, one pale fibre on an enormous loom. It drifts, catches sunlight, and joins the weave around the nucleus where gas is lifting through pores. The fibre does not shout. It simply takes its place among neighbouring threads, crossing and recrossing until a faint fabric appears. The coma's cloth, thin but real, held together by motion more than by touch. Pull back a little, and the texture becomes clear. Near the sunward side, the cloth is thicker, as if extra weft had been laid into that quadrant. Farther from the sun, the stitches loosen, and the fabric thins into a tail so delicate you can see the star field through it. This is not a banner, it's gauze. The pattern is set by the gas that carries grains outward, and by the quiet scattering of light that makes a filament visible long enough to be counted before it drifts beyond the loom. Closer still to the nucleus, jets act like hidden shuttles. They throw out small runs of thread in repeating directions. If several shuttles work at once, their pulls can cancel, and the cloth remains centered on the core, well behaved in the frame. If one sector is livelier, the weave bulges there, and nightly ephemerides need a gentle adjustment. The settling we see around this visitor keeps close to symmetry. No puckers that our charts can't smooth, no tugs strong enough to distort the whole sheet. The grain sizes matter. Fine particles stay suspended, brightening the fabric without making it heavy. Larger grains fall behind, slow knots in the cloth that fade quickly as the loom moves on. Polarimetry is our way of reading this texture with fingertips. It tells us how light prefers to bounce or burrow among the strands, and whether the surface is plush or polished. In this case, the measurements speak of an unusual knit, a deeper, narrower negative polarization than is typical, suggesting grain properties we don't often handle, a new bolt on the shelf of interstellar cloth. Wider still, the coma shows its composition as a dye does. Carbon dioxide gives the fabric most of its tint here, staining a region hundreds of thousands of kilometers from the core, while water's dye is paler at this distance. The pattern isn't a print, it's intrinsic to the fibers themselves. On an interstellar loom, different bolts can come from different rooms, and this one's origin favored CO₂. That is a design choice made long before this cloth reached our light. The tail is the cloth's loose end, drawn away by the solar wind, which plays the part of a firm, steady hand. The weave aligns with that hand automatically. There's no artistry to the direction. The art lies in how evenly the threads let go. A tidy tail means no ragged tears, no sudden snags in the warp. The images we stack night by night show that kind of cleanliness, the sort that speaks well of the fabric's strength. From the close stitch to the broad panel, the geometry is a calm lesson. The path of the nucleus is a line pinned on the cutting table, a hyperbolic stroke that won't be hemmed into a returning loop. Its tilt is small, a near alignment with the main plane, but the direction is opposite the usual traffic, like a strip of cloth laid counter to grain. Even so, the drape is smooth. No hard creases, just a measured sweep past the sun's bright edge and into the wide room beyond. I check the scale of the weave. Hubble's view put bounds on the core beneath it. Perhaps a lump only a few 100 meters across, perhaps a few kilometers, size enough to hold threads together under gentle pulls, small enough that each new jet can still add a visible change to the cloth at certain times. Meanwhile, Spherex traced the CO2 dye far out, so far that the fabric's reach exceeded a simple scarf. Think shore, light and extensive, with edges that blur into the air. When I look for period, how the pattern repeats, I watch the sunlit quadrant cycle from fuller to thinner, as if a spindle turned and presented a new patch of surface to the heat with each slow rotation. If the period is hours, the thickening and thinning will keep that time. If it is longer, the weave will change more languidly. Either way, the loom is patient, and so are we. We let the stacks of nights accumulate until the repeat speaks clearly. A long sentence will help the whole cloth come into view, one unbroken thread that runs from selvage to selvage. Because sometimes carrying everything at once is what lets the mind relax into the pattern without snagging. As single grains leave the surface like fine fibers lifting from a bolt, as gas shuttles them outward into a light, even weave, whose sunward side thickens by a measured fraction while the leeward side loosens into gauze. As polarimetry strokes the fabric and finds an uncommon texture in the way light prefers to lie flat within it. And as spectroscopy shows the cloth to be dyed richly with carbon dioxide long before water's colour fully takes, the map that emerges, grain to sheet to path, needs no drama to be understood, because the weave and the geometry agree on what the next rows will look like. Pulling back to the whole field, the comet's fabric becomes a small swatch within a much larger tapestry. The ecliptic's broadcloth woven by planets and dust and solar wind. The swatch crosses on a bias, never meant to be stitched in, and yet it adds its pattern to our understanding of the larger piece. For a season, the threads shine, then they thin until only the memory of their texture remains. It is tempting to test for tears. Any hint of fragmentation that would rip the cloth and change the drape, but the panels so far are intact. No duplicate cores, no obvious bolts splitting along a weak seam. If that changes, the cut will be visible as double knots in the tail or a bright patch that walks away from the main weave. For now, we watch the edges and find them true. All of this can be held gently. One fleck becomes a thread. Threads make a panel. The panel traces a line across a larger cloth that most nights looks exactly like a night sky. The comfort is in the consistency. The physics speaks in the pattern, and the pattern stays even, which is why the mind can set down its pins and let the spool turn without supervision for a while. When the graph for tonight's run resolves, the counts align with yesterday's within the expected weave of numbers. The panel neither thickens nor thins beyond what the distance and the turning warrant. I mark the margin in a soft pencil, same hand, same cloth, and notice my own shoulders drop a fraction, because the quiet agreement between scales, from fibre to field, is the most restful thing a sky can offer. The count's steady, and if the night lays a mist across our thoughts, then we let shapes appear only as far as they're willing. If a contour edges forward, we name it softly and stop there. If it fades, we allow it. The quiet is not an emptiness. It's a place where possibilities can stand without jostling. I keep them spaced, like lanterns set far apart on a foggy path, each with its own circle of light, none trying to prove more than it can bear. If small tugs happen in the dark, gravity passing between the traveller and nearby stones, then the first effect will be invisible to ordinary watching, a nudge that takes years to amount to anything you could point to. We note the geometry and keep the ledger open because long consequences do not need loud beginnings. If a crack forms, then the mist might brighten for a night and show a second glow beside the first. We watch for that extra lantern, and, if it appears, ask whether the wind of gas could have placed it there all by itself. If the sun flares at the same hour as a close pass, then the fog will carry rumour farther than radio can. But our task will still be simple. Hold the timeline to the light and see whether with is only near, and whether near is all the story needs. If a narrow whisper shows up on a quiet band, a tone that lives where hydrogen likes to listen, then our first duty is to distrust it gently until it survives every test designed to make it vanish. The mist is good at producing shapes out of nothing, and our ears are eager to hear patterns even where rain is the only drummer. If the upper air rustles when no storm is forecast, then we compare it against the sun's own weather, because charged particles can make the ionized layers ring like a glass. The comet may pass through the same hour without being the cause of anything. If agencies convene and the cadence of memos quickens, then we remember that coordination is how care sounds, not how secrets are kept. Fog makes footsteps seem closer than they are. If attention itself begins to hum, then the hum can pull at decisions. That is not physics, and yet it shapes the room we work in. So we name it and keep it in view without letting it lead the instruments. If several clocks disagree for a breath, then we look first for damp wires and drifting calibrations, because a mist can bend a beam without changing the forest. Only after the practical is exhausted do we let the larger questions step forward. I keep the 8 lanterns in their places and walk past them one by one, not as a guard, only as a calm witness. The long domino that might begin with a fraction and end with a mile, the fracture that might scatter pieces like glints in fog, the solar ripple that is almost always the sun being the sun, the artificial note that has never earned its name, the atmospheric quiver that belongs to storms from the star, the cascade of careful meetings that sounds louder than it is, the chorus of minds that can swell beyond the score, and the wrinkle in the timing that instruments will usually iron out when dawn and patience arrive. If I frame them this way, then each keeps its scale. The mist is helpful for that. It blunts the edges of fear and lets proportion come back. The traveller itself has continued to keep a steady outline. That steady outline is, for now, the largest lantern in the scene, and it throws enough light to see our footing. The way I speak about them becomes its own sort of weather, so I check my tone. If my words try to take up more room than the data can hold, then the mist will echo them until the shape seems larger than it is. That serves no one, especially those trying to sleep. If, instead, I let the evidence set the volume, then speculation finds the right distance from the ear, close enough to hear, far enough not to startle. There's a long sentence I've been holding back, and I'll let it run now, unbroken, low, and even, because a single line that doesn't stop can carry a full tray of thought across the room without spillin'. As the path remains clean and the coma's chemistry continues to lean toward early rising ices, while images show no confirmed splitting, and the dates we've written still read as waypoints rather than warnings, the only honest way to hold the 8 possibilities is to keep them in the mist on their own hooks, respected, labelled, visited in the right order, and never confused for the warm, steady lantern of what the instruments have actually seen. If you want a picture to fall asleep with, let it be this: a damp meadow before sunrise, a line of dim lamps along a footpath, the traveller's glow farther down, constant and pale, the air quiet enough that you can hear your own breath set its pace, and each possible story standing where it belongs, within its small circle, waiting politely for the day to decide whether it is a rock, a shrub, or only a patch of harmless fog that looked like something else for a moment, and then remembered how to be air. That is enough for tonight. 3 handrails for the long road, set low so we can lean without straining. Handrail 1. The traveller's course is hyperbolic and retrograde, a through journey that will not circle back. Handrail 2. Its closest waypoints inside the system have been respectful. Millions of miles from Mars in early October, and nothing tighter on the outbound leg that asks us to speak in alarms. Handrail 3. The mass is small by planetary standards, and small masses tug softly. With those rails under the palm, we can take a quiet step into patience. Tiny gravitational exchanges do happen. Space is fluent in them. A flyby leaves a trace in someone's ledger, even if that trace is too light to see for years. A fraction of a millimeter per second, a fraction of a degree. These are the sizes that can matter, given long enough time. But can is not will, and the road between them is long and full of forks. I picture the inner system as a highway with wide, calm shoulders. The planets keep their lanes effortlessly. Small stones drift on frontage roads. A visitor like this one crosses the interchange, touches a current, and moves on. The gravitational handshake is real, yet brief. For an asteroid to feel it enough to change a century from now, geometry must line up exactly, and most of the time geometry keeps to its usual kindness and misses by more than enough. Delta V, the change in speed that trajectories drink like a measured medicine, is our quiet metric. At a few tens of millions of kilometers, the dose is homeopathic. Whether a minor body acquires a persistent drift depends on the closeness of that drink, the direction, the timing within its own orbit, and the orbital climate set by larger neighbors like Jupiter. That climate matters more than tonight's passerby. Dominoes that take decades means starting small and staying small for a very long time. It means a real effect buried under effects that are bigger and more routine, like the way a long road's grade is set by the mountain, not by a single pebble. The wise response is not to deny the pebble. It is to keep proportion. We track, we model, we let distant numbers knit themselves into trend lines before we pronounce the future. Mile markers help. The Mars marker has already slid past, leaving nothing noisy in its wake. The solar turn set its own marker, perihelion kept with courtesy, activity aligned with chemistry, the tail remembering its compass. The outbound markers will be quieter still. None of these pins suggest a corridor for close, repeated encounters with populations we worry about. The ledger stays neat. Non-gravitational nudges, those little thrusts from gas escaping, belong in the same book. If jets fire evenly around the surface, Their pushes cancel like careful lane changes on an empty road. Instruments watching light curves for a repeating swell, rotation's signature, have so far seen modulation without mischief. The course holds. The mathematics can afford to be sleepy. Zooming out to the belt between Mars and Jupiter, you can imagine hundreds of thousands of small travelers keeping to their own errands, most of them oblivious to this one's passage. Jupiter's wide gravity sets the tempo there. Resonances born of its mass do the large work. A cometary flyby at tens of millions of kilometers is not the bandleader. It's a guest who never reaches the stage. It is tempting to try to calculate everything. We could, in principle, sum every handshake. Planet, moon, asteroid, dust. We could let a computer carry those sums forward for a century and see whether any lines cross in ways they would not have. Even that feat would tell us mostly about sensitivity, how small uncertainties grow when given years to meander, how a 1 millimeter mismeasure at the beginning can become kilometers at the end, how chaos is not danger so much as openness about outcomes. Here is the long sentence this chapter was waiting for, and I'll give it to you unbroken, so your breath can match its length, and your shoulders can sink another inch into the bed, as the through journey continues on its single bend and away. As the early October waypoint near Mars leaves only the lightest arithmetic in its wake, and the post-perihelion leg offers no unusually tight crossings. As the mass of the nucleus remains too modest, and its jets too well balanced to write a large non-gravitational footnote. The image that holds for the decades-long domino is simply this calm one, that the road is long, the shoulder is wide, the grade is set by mountains we already know. And any pebble moved today will almost surely rest again without starting a line of falling stones. Keeping watch does not mean keeping worry. It means we save the ephemerides with care. It means we check in on familiar families of objects, the near-Earth ones whose names we already know, and the quieter rocks that share Mars's orbit. It means we let the outbound leg teach us the last of this visitor's character, and file it alongside the others who taught us how varied ordinary can be. A mile marker is the right motif to end on. We've touched 3 tonight: the through path, the courteous distances, the small tug. They will be there tomorrow too, set low and steady, easy to rest a hand on if the road feels long. And if the road feels short, because sleep arrived halfway through, they'll be waiting when you wake. The same handrails, the same quiet. The quiet returns to its own soft rhythm, and the 3 markers remain where we set them. Tonight one hue leads the eye. A soft oxygen green threads through the coma like a quiet filament of light. Not vivid, not insistent, just enough to tint the halo where gas glows and dust only reflects. I keep the exposure gentle and let that green guide the reading, because colour is a kind of sentence. Gas writes in its own ink, dust borrows the sun's. Colour helps when we're listening for fragments. If the nucleus were to split, 2 condensations would begin to write slightly different sentences in light. The green would center on more than one peak. A faint second core would take on its own small haze. The tail might develop a kink where forces divide their work. Even before shapes resolve, color can whisper that structure has changed. Across perihelion, space-based eyes saw the object brighten quickly. Some frames leaned toward blue, where processing enhances the shorter wavelengths. Others, in long exposure ground images, carried the familiar green that oxygen and small carbon chains can give. Either way, a gas-led halo is the story, and colour is the proof that chemistry is doing most of the talking, while dust takes a quieter role than in many homegrown comets. Brightness spikes have their own palette. An outburst often thickens the continuum from dust, warming the tone. Gas-rich episodes can make the green more apparent where oxygen's forbidden line sings. So I watch both the counts and the colour, because a sudden change without a clear reason in geometry or exposure is the sort of hint we treat with steady care. Interesting enough to keep, not loud enough to declare. Polarimetry adds a painter's second opinion. When light scatters off grains, its polarization twists according to size and texture. Here, the curve dips unusually deep on the negative side at small phase angles, then turns over at a modest 15 to 17 degrees, a combination that speaks of fine, compact grains with surface properties we don't catalogue often. That, too, nudges the story toward a gas-forward, delicate dust coma, the kind that can look greener than average while remaining optically thin. If fragments were already roaming, the light should tell us in sequence. First, a local bright patch appears. Then that patch starts to separate with a measured drift. Later, the tail records the split as twin threads that slowly diverge. Colour would follow them, especially the green, because fresh surfaces feed gas efficiently for a while. Instead, the post-perihelion record so far shows swifter brightening near the sun, and then a return towards steadier counts. No secondary cores, no double streamers with their own centres of gravity. Colour, though, invites patience. The halo can look greener as phase geometry changes, and it can look bluer in coronagraph products that wait shorter wavelengths for contrast near the solar limb. I keep the comparison honest by noting filters and instruments, because the same object, written by different cameras, will never sound exactly the same shade. If a fragment emerges later, we'll meet it in the colour first. Two green kernels would sit like twin punctuation marks inside a single phrase. The photometric centre would wobble between them. The tail would carry a soft zig where the new mass rearranged the outflow. It isn't here tonight. Absence is not proof of never, but it is enough to let the shoulders drop and the jaw loosen while we keep the watch easy. Brightness near perihelion rose fast, and that can look like the opening move of a break. But a gas-led surge can do the same without any tearing at all, as subsurface pockets connect and vent while the sun rounds to its closest angle. The text of the light says gas first, by the numbers and small grains, by the way polarization leans. The hue says the same, and I prefer when multiple witnesses speak softly and agree. I lay the green thread across a timeline and look for cadence. On several nights, the sunward quadrant deepened and thinned on a gentle period, likely rotation. Colour did not jump from band to band. It held its place with the coma, a consistent ink guiding a consistent line. If a fresh face had been ripped open, the line would have thickened abruptly, grown greener at the edges, and then relaxed. Not impossible, simply not seen. One long sentence belongs here, unbroken, because a single, even breath can help the eye follow what the light is saying without tripping, and because colour itself is easiest to believe when it runs as a strand rather than as a set of points. As the coma's hue stays gas forward with a modest oxygen green that holds across instruments, while perihelion brightening tracks the behaviour of volatiles heated, and not of dust alone. as polarimetry sketches fine-grained textures, and the images, both coronagraph and ground-based, decline to show a second core or a tail that has learned two centers. The simplest, calmest reading is that color is carrying chemistry rather than fracture, and that the palette can shift with geometry without implying a tear. If fragmentation comes on the outbound side, we'll be ready to color match the new piece. Fragments share the same pigments for a while, then age along their own curves. We'll note how quickly the green fades, how much the continuum warms, whether a sodium glow appears near the nucleus, if fresh grains expose salts to sunlight. Each change would be a step in the grammar of breaking, a careful evolution rather than a shock. For a minute, let the screen go dim and keep only the thread of hue in mind. Imagine the halo as a ring of faint green, the core as a slightly richer bead at the center, the tail as a wisp where the green thins and the grey of starlight returns. Outside your window, the room is midnight blue, and that is enough. The machines hum at the edge of hearing. Numbers roll through their quiet lanes. The colour keeps its place, and the heart learns its pace. When the displays brighten again, I test the light one more way. I subtract the colours that belong to glare and let the comet's own spectrum stand. Lines for carbon dioxide lie outside visible green, but their presence enables oxygen to shine where atoms unwind in the coma's thin air. The result is the hue we see, the story we can follow without calculating. Because once chemistry draws a line in colour, the mind draws a line in care. I finish with the simplest practical promise colour can make. If a second core appears, we'll see two greens breathing instead of one. If the brightness spikes without a twin, the green will tell us how much was gas and how much was dust. If nothing strange happens, the tone will fade in step with distance, and the memory of this particular shade will become part of a small, private catalogue. The greens of visitors who came once and taught us how much light can say by itself. At the threshold of the dark field, I rest my hand on the frame. We take a slow walk past the antennas. The gravel underfoot remembers the day's heat and gives it back in a sigh you can almost feel. A red light on the control shed blinks like an easy heartbeat. Each dish leans into the dark with the posture of someone listening for a friend across a wide field. We keep our pace even and let the machines keep theirs. The first array holds its bowl toward a strip of sky where the visitor's position is written into tonight's schedule. Nothing dramatic in the pointing. The logs will note start and stop, center frequency and bandwidth, gain and weather. Engineers like clean paths, because clean paths let a question be asked without tangling. A slow walk works the same way. One step, then another. No skipping. Signals have ways of being helpful when we let them. A narrow, steady tone is like a straight country road. A wide, messy splash is like a footpath through grass. The trick is to know which kind of road belongs to nature at this hour, and which belongs to the wires we made. We pass a small sign about airplanes and satellites. The array will ignore those with careful filters, then check again. Because sometimes the sky borrows our voices and throws them back with a harmless echo. Another dish lives farther out, the kind that likes to sweep. What it catches is not a sentence so much as the alphabet scattered across a field. Later, a program will shuffle those letters into piles and ask whether any pile looks like a word. We will ask too, but softly, because the night is generous with coincidences, and a walk at a patient pace helps us leave them where they belong. There is a building with dimmed windows and a narrow door. Inside, a waterfall of plots slides down a bank of screens. Most water is ordinary, the comfortable noise of the cosmos, a river of hiss with small stones in it. Some stones are known, pulsars, Marses, the chatter of our own planet. The rest will be put in boxes, with names like Check Again, and probably Us. It's honest work and somehow soothing, like following a path that has been walked enough times to feel trustworthy in the dark. We keep the visitor in mind, but not at the center of the walk. If a whisper were tied to its passing, it would live where neutral hydrogen likes to speak, or in another quiet band chosen for clarity rather than spectacle. We listen during windows when geometry is kind, then we turn our attention to the archive and ask if the hour we couldn't watch has a cousin in old data. A stroll through a library is still a stroll. Outside again, the antennas make low silhouettes against a wintering sky. The tail of the comet is somewhere beyond a low ridge, marking direction more by habit than by choice. That shared habit, the way dust and plasma take the same road away from light, reminds us that many signals are simple travelers. They go where they must. Our job is only to be on the path at the right time with quiet shoes. On the next stretch, we pass a small, hand-lettered note, RFI audit at dawn. It explains the humor of this craft. The best way to tell what the night really said is to know your own speech well enough to subtract it. A hint that survives every subtraction is the only kind worth turning into a letter to the world. Most do not survive, and that is not a failure. It's a kind of courtesy we pay each other across disciplines and hills. We follow a cable run to the back of the site and stand a moment where the ground is cooler. I describe as simply as I can how a false trail looks when you meet it up close. It arrives at the same time on two antennas that share a power strip. It repeats exactly when a passing truck will be visible from a security camera. It sits right where a microwave oven would sing if someone warmed soup at midnight. When those paths line up, the walk turns, and we let that lane end. Some nights a burst will cut across the path with the speed of a startled deer. Milliseconds, bright, gone. We note the time and call a neighbor to see whether their field saw the same thing. If it did, we look up at the stars and nod. If it didn't, we look down at our boots and smile. Either way, we continue at the same pace because the trail is long. Sleep prefers the rhythm. Halfway back to the gate, I let a long sentence take your hand, one that doesn't break, so the mind can follow a single, level lane without looking left or right for a while. The way a path through scrub keeps you inside its soft edges until the fence appears. As the dishes keep, they're listening to the hours geometry allows, and the software walks its own routes through the river of numbers, rejecting the voices we know and replaying the short, sharp ones that could be sky, until they agree with each other across rooms and ridgelines. The only fair promise to make is that a true whisper would be patient enough to bear every subtraction, and plain enough to be recognized by more than one pair of ears. We stop at a bench and let the night ask its easy questions. What counts as enough? How much agreement is comfort? When is a coincidence only a coincidence? There is no hurry to answer. The visitor is already on the outbound road. If it carried a message, we will find it by listening the same way tomorrow and the day after, not by running. At the fence, the path widens and the desert breathes. The dishes lean a little farther, as if giving us room. A dim lamp folds a triangle of light onto gravel, and in it I can just see a tiny moth tracing a practiced loop around nothing at all. That small motion is a good last image for tonight's walk. It is regular. It is harmless. It belongs to the same quiet that lets antennas listen without strain. You can keep that triangle, the bench, and the low white shapes of the dishes as you close your eyes. The path will be here when you open them. The logs will have filled with their careful lines. The sky will go on speaking in the ways it always has, which is to say without urgency, and we'll meet it at the gate again at the same untroubled pace. The night softens its edges. The field keeps its distance. The last red blink on the shed stays steady as we look away. Dear listener, let me write to you as if we were sharing the same rail on a quiet deck at night, leaning just enough to feel the ship breathe. The sea is even. The wake is a lace we don't need to study. Far off, a lantern on the bow marks the course, and in its small, steady circle, we can talk about attention without raising our voices. You are not alone in watching the horizon. Crews on many vessels do the same, each with their own charts and lamps, each with their own reasons for keeping the watch. Some stand at the prow and call out bearings in confident tones. Some stay by the compass and speak only when asked. A few pace between instruments, counting quietly. Out here, bravado tends to fall away. The water is patient, and patient water prefers patient sailors. When a traveller from another current crosses our lane, the fleet's mood changes a little. It doesn't lurch, it listens harder. The navigators compare logs. We saw it there, at that hour, with these conditions. The signalmen swap notes. We tried this frequency, under this sky, with this sensitivity. The quartermasters mark the next waypoints on the broad chart and write what the last ones taught. None of this is drama. It's seamanship. I think about you in this fleet. Maybe you read the shipboard notices when the bell rings. Maybe you like the longer reports filed at dawn. Maybe you sketch your own map from the way the lights drift across the surface of the page. However you attend, it matters. On quiet crossings, attention is the work. The ocean doesn't hurry the hull. The people aboard decide what pace feels right. You chose a slow watch tonight, and I'm grateful for it. Some voices will try to make the sea sound stormy, even when it is not. They love to name waves as if each one could overturn the ship. I don't blame them. A gale makes for a livelier story. But a great deal of the voyage is made of fair water and small course corrections, and describing fair water kindly is also a craft. The bow lamp pays no attention to shouting. It cares about headings. A fleet can talk itself into a turn. If enough crews lean into a rumour, you can feel the rudders tremble across a whole line of ships. That's not physics, it's company. And company matters. It fills journals, it points telescopes, it funds expeditions. This is why speaking calmly is not the same as speaking small. It is choosing the right sail for the weather. Set too much canvas, and the hull strains for no reason. Reef too hard, and you miss a good wind. Tonight's wind is steady, a mid-watch breeze that keeps the wake white, but never noisy. You may wonder how to hold your own thoughts in a flotilla like this. May I offer a practice? Choose 3 bearings and return to them when talk grows tall. First, the ship's speed relative to the water, the plane motion of the traveller across the chart. Second, the sextant's angle to the sun and stars, the geometry that allows or denies a view. Third, the log of provisions, the chemistry and counts that describe what the traveller carries off its decks into space. When these three stay in trim, the rest of the gossip loses its urgency and becomes background surf. From time to time, a captain will step onto the deck and say a little more than the map demands, partly to settle the crew, partly to honour the watch. This is what I'm doing now. The truest statements in our book this week are simple. The course was kept around the bright bend. The distances to our neighbouring ports were comfortable. The holds vented more carbon wind than water vapour. The wake pointed the expected way. These are not small truths. They are the keel. They keep us upright when speculation tries to act like weather. I know there are quieter reasons you're here. Some people walk the deck at night to fall asleep to the hull's soft repetitions. Some bring a day's weight to the rail and let the bow carry it a mile at a time until the load feels measured instead of amorphous. Some want to learn without acquiring a storm. All of these are good reasons. None of them need a squall. There is a long sentence I want to give you, unbroken, like the horizon on a clear midwatch, because one steady line helps the body follow meaning without bracing for impact, and because this whole crossing has asked for patience, more than for posture. As the fleet keeps its even spacing, and the lantern on the bow holds its calm circle, as the quartermasters write down the perihelion hour, and the chemists note that carbon wind led the dance while water waited its turn, as signalmen compare empty tapes and agree that silence is also news, the right way to be a companion to this traveller is simply to stand the watch with a clear head and a loose grip on the wheel, neither turning because someone shouted, nor ignoring the chart, because someone else swore they'd been through these waters before. In ports along the route, people cluster on the quays, curious and kind. They ask whether the ship is ordinary or extraordinary, whether the cargo is unusual, whether the route will cross their view again. The true answers are quiet. It is a visitor on a one-way lane. Its stores are tilted toward the cold-born gases that wake early under a modest sun. It will not call twice. The crowds nod. They wave anyway. Ships and shores understand each other like that. You and I can end this letter with something smaller than a manifesto. Let's agree to keep an eye on the same three bearings and to write down the hours that matter without dressing them up. Let's agree to leave room for wonder without letting it take the helm. Let's agree to let sleep walk us back to our cabins when the deck feels level, because it is level, and the line of foam behind us is telling a steady story at exactly the right volume for rest. You can let your shoulders drop here. The sky does too. Night holds the lab in a steady glow. Monitors dim to a courteous low. Indicator LEDs keep their tiny constellations. A desk lamp draws a circle on the logbook like a small moon of its own. In this light, the numbers look less like orders and more like calm visitors waiting their turn. I slide the chair closer and make a quiet ledger. Date, instrument, distance, line strengths, magnitude notes, geometry, weather. Each entry gets a neat stroke, and each stroke makes the page reflect a little more. Not a glare, only the kind of faint shine paper gives when it agrees with ink. Tonight, agreement is a comfort. First line, the early chemistry that leaned toward carbon dioxide. The figure is still there, clear and modest in its decimals, and it catches the lamp just enough to remind me that a ratio can be a form of light, one value bright beside another, the bright one telling the story of which ice woke first. Second line, the hyperbolic course, retrograde, low tilt. The curves I penciled weeks ago still fit. Their graphite sheen hasn't smudged. Third line, the October dates that bracketed the turn, a pair of soft highlights on the path that looked briefly golden in coronagraph products, and then settled back into ordinary starlight. I turn to the graphs. Their axes faintly gleam like rails laid for a careful train of dots. The dots form gentle slopes rather than cliffs. Post-perihelion counts relax as distance increases, and where rotation peeks through, the light ripple is regular. Bright, then a breath. Bright, then a breath again. The consistency lets the lamp's circle feel larger than it is. Across the room, the spectrograph's summary window rests in a dark theme, lines rising in thin, pale strokes against graphite. I read them as if each were a filament. Carbon dioxide taking the current easily, water glowing softer, carbon monoxide faint but present. Filaments last when the circuit is sound, and that's the feeling the plots give. No sparking, no flicker, only steadiness at a level the power supply and the sky agree upon. A folder of images opens, with the restraint our eyes prefer at this hour. Each frame is a soft grey rectangle with a brighter pebble, and its round penumbra. When I blink between nights, the pebble shifts by the predicted step, and the penumbra thickens or thins just a little with sun angle. Even the tail is a lesson in luminance, away from the sun, away from the glare, a tapering ribbon of reflected light that refuses drama, and, by refusing, earns trust. On the whiteboard, the team leaves for late hours. Someone has written 3 headings in dry erase ink that shines a touch where the lamp strikes. Motion, activity, outlook. Under motion, only small corrections. A handful of figures, each scribbled out and rewritten cleaner. Arrows lined with a ruler so their reflections are straight. Under activity, 2 bullets. CO₂ lead, rotation present. Under outlook, a line I like more than any number here. Keep doing the simple things well. I check the inbound to outbound handover. The pages before tonight showed approach. Rising counts, tighter angles, increased care with exposure to avoid saturating the tiny bright core. The pages after tonight begin the easing. Longer integrations allowed again, less glare, more room to breathe between measures. The lamp on my desk makes a slow ellipse on the paper as I shift, and that gentle motion feels like a seal on the transition. A pass from the bright end of the room to the darker. A long sentence belongs here. One long pane of light the eye can follow without stepping, because a single, unbroken reflection can carry a roomful of detail without a stumble. And in carrying it, let the shoulders lower and the jaw unclench. As the ledger keeps its lines for an interstellar traveller whose course bends once and departs while its coma continues to answer the sun with carbon dioxide foremost and water steady below. As images confirm a single centre and a tail that holds its direction, and the light curves repeat their calm, rise and rest. Pattern like a pulse that never worries, the task that remains is not to invent a new lamp for shadows that are already thin, but to keep the present lamps trimmed, saving each time stamp cleanly, repeating the exposures at a pace that respects sleep, and letting the evidence stay brighter than any story we might be tempted to place in front of it. I check for omissions, Venus window, logged as geometry, not as encounter. Jupiter in spring, circled as a reminder to revisit brightness and motion with the long focal length scopes in case the distant glare invites a different processing approach. Community notes, filed with a thin underline, a reminder that many hands share this light, and many rooms look blue at this hour for the same reason. Nothing in these checks throws a new shine across the page. The lamp does not need turning up. The watch list stays short, which is its own kind of luminous kindness. Fragment caution. No, but keep the nightly blink test. Signal audits, active as opportunities allow, but no change in posture. Atmospheric monitors correlate with solar data first, then even quieter. The list fits on a sticky note that sits in the lamp's pool like a paper island, its edges glowing slightly from the angle of the bulb. I flip back to the first entry after discovery. The ink there is darker, the handwriting too brisk, the kind of early enthusiasm that bright light can invite. Subsequent pages have lightened, more space between lines, more margin for breath. The panelled reflection off the paper looks calmer too, as if the desk itself had decided to soften. That's the rhythm a good long watch earns. Before I close the book, I let the lamp catch the spine of the binder where we keep instrument calibrations. Flats, darks, wavelength solutions, gain logs. The metal rings flash back in little crescents, promise circles for future nights. The promise is ordinary, and that is why it works. We will repeat what works. We will adjust what drifts. We will note what changes. We will leave blank space where blank space is honest. There's one more glance to give the tale. I open the most recent frame and reduce the stretch slightly so background stars dim, and the faintest reach of the coma still shows. The tail continues to draw a clean vector from core to away, a narrow road of light particles, and light itself sharing a direction that does not rush and does not lag. If the lamp could approve, it would. I cap the pen, and the lamp finds the small rows of dots that ink leaves behind when it pauses. Tiny reflections, like a string of soft stars. They're in no hurry to fade. Neither am I. I close the cover, let the screensaver walk a slow field of pale dots across black, and set the lamp a notch lower so the room learns the next degree of dark. The line we've kept tonight continues without our supervision, which is the truest light of all in a night shift lab. We can leave the room as we found it, with the light low, and the page closed. The traveller kept its curve around the sun on October 29, at a distance that belongs to quiet work rather than alarm. It leaned on early rising ices, carbon dioxide foremost, water present, but softer. The coma stayed centered. The tail kept its plane direction away from light. Instruments near and far agreed often enough to feel like company. If you hold only a few images as you drift, let them be simple ones. A faint halo that thickens a little toward the sun. A clean path that bends once and does not return. A set of lines on a spectrum where one glow rises higher than the rest. None of these scenes needs haste. They live at the tempo of long breaths. Tonight's ledger remains short. No confirmed split in the core. No certified whisper from the radios. No strange turn in the trajectory that asks the body to tense. The changes we watch are measured in steady counts and gentle phases. The kind that match the hour when rooms are dim and windows reflect more of the inside than the outside. That reflection is welcome. It means we've done enough for now. I'll keep the three bearings waiting. Motion across the starfield, chemistry in the light, an outlook along a calm, outbound road. You can keep the steadiness. Let it settle in your shoulders and stay there. Morning will read the same pages and write a few more lines. The sky will continue without us for a while, which is one of the sky's best gifts. Thank you for keeping the watch in this way. Curious, careful, and unhurried. May the next minutes narrow to the width of your own breathing, and may the last sound you notice be the quiet shape of the room, evening itself into rest. Good night, and sleep well.